How did the CIA and Special Forces actually steal a secret helicopter? Well, they trained for months. They didn't just use one, but two Chinooks, stripping out all the non-essential parts and simulating the heist by carrying hundreds of gallons of water to match the secret helicopter's weight. They practiced this by flying from one part of the US to the other. But how do you lift a flying tank almost the same weight as the transporter? You transport the extremely large rotors onto a cargo plane, while Special Forces hooked the body of the secret helicopter to this Chinook. And they did all of this in the middle of a dangerous sandstorm. More detail all in the video ahead. In 1988, a secret US mission in northern Chad led to the capture of a Soviet Mi-24 attack helicopter. The same export version is also called Mi-25. This high-risk operation, codenamed Operation Mount Hope 3, remains one of the most daring recovery missions in Cold War history. Let's take a look at how this started. The Toyota War 1986 to 1987 literally means people working the last of a series of border clashes that took place from 1978 to 1987 decided which country would control the Awazoo Strip, a 100-kilometer deep section of northern Chad that runs along the Libyan border, using only armed Toyota pickup trucks, or technicals, for mobility. These Shadayan forces with Toyota trucks soundly defeated the well-equipped Libyans despite them having one of the most advanced technology in this era with Soviet helicopters and armored tanks. Suffering heavy losses, the Libyans abandoned large amounts of equipment as they fled Chad. The material left behind presented the West with a unique opportunity to study Soviet battlefield technology. One of the most valuable assets was the Mi-25 Hind, an export version of the MiL Mi-24, which the United States had sought to study for years. Since this is no ordinary task, lifting a helicopter with an empty weight of 8,500 kilograms, which translates to approximately 18,739 pounds, requires meticulous planning and execution. In April 1988, Company E prepared for the operation with a stateside test simulating the lifting and flying of a sling-loaded helicopter. The unit disassembled and loaded two MH-47Ds into a U.S. Air Force C-5 Galaxy and transported them to Roswell, New Mexico. To replicate the distance in Chad, the reassembled Chinooks flew to Biggs Army Airfield in El Paso, Texas. There, the first MH-47D sling-loaded 6 full 500-gallon water to simulate the weight of a Mi-24. Flying at night around White Sands, New Mexico, both helicopters had to land twice and refuel from C-130s engaged along their route. Having successfully completed the simulation, Company E was ready when it received the execution order on 21st May 1988. Before fitting the Chinooks into the cargo bay, the maintenance crews had to remove the blades, rotor heads, forward and aft transmission pylons, drive shafts, and transmissions. With all preparations complete, the C-5 departed from Fort Campbell, Kentucky in the second week of June, delivering the two MH-47Ds along with more than 60 crew and maintenance personnel on a non-stop flight to N'Djamena. At midnight on 11 June 1988, the two MH-47Ds and their crews departed from N'Djamena for a 550-mile direct flight to Al-Wadi Down. The crews had planned no refueling stops during the initial leg. Although the helicopters were not equipped with air-to-air refueling capabilities, they carried an internal system devised by Company E. This system consisted of fuel tanks rolled into the aircraft via the ramp, connected to one another, and then filled. When fully loaded, the system added an additional 600 gallons of fuel and more than 5,000 pounds to the aircraft. In a true test of skill, the crews flew over the trackless Saharan desert at night, relying only on then sophisticated but now rudimentary navigational aids. The primary aid was Omega, a global long-range radio navigational system that transmitted very low-frequency signals from fixed locations to assist ships and aircraft in navigation. The second aid was Doppler radar. As dawn approached, the crew spotted the early rays of the sun reflecting off the airfield at Al-Wadi Down and vectored in toward the waiting Hind. The two Mi-47D helicopters touched down as close to the Mi-24 helicopter as possible in Al-Wadi Down, positioning themselves for a swift extraction. A top-down view of the map reveals the proximity of the Libyan and Chadian forces situated just a few miles ahead of the Awazoo Strip, heightening the risk of detection. If the Libyans became aware of the extraction, it would likely attempt to strike the helicopters and the U.S. personnel already working to secure the Hind for transport. While the rotor blade was too large, so a C-130 aircraft was assigned to transport them along with the discarded internal fuel tanks from the two Chinooks. To ensure stability during the lift, each U.S. helicopter was equipped with dual hooks beneath the airframe designed to support the load at speeds of up to 90 knots, or approximately 104 miles per hour. With the Mi-24 securely slung beneath them, the helicopters embarked on their return journey to N'Djamena. Without an internal fuel system, the helicopters had to make two refueling stops along the way, one at Faya Largeau and another at the French Foreign Legion airfield in Moussoro. At the first stop in Faya Largeau, a U.S. Air Force C-130 had established a forward arming and refueling point. The refueling process was carried out in stages. The Chinooks first set the stolen helicopter on the ground, which turned out to be a very dangerous and time-consuming process as they had to carefully unhook it and refuel to prepare for the next leg of their journey, and then reattach the load once both helicopters had completed refueling. After refueling, the Chinooks resumed their journey to the next FARP at Moussoro, where the site was manned by the French Foreign Legion. Upon arrival, the pilots carefully set the Mi-24 down inside a fenced compound, while both MH-47Ds had to land outside the perimeter to refuel. Just 45 minutes from their destination, airfield in N'Djamena, Chad, the crews of two MH-47D Chinook heavy-lift helicopters encountered a critical situation. They were about to be engulfed by a massive sandstorm. Under normal circumstances, the pilots would have simply flown above the storm. However, this time that option was impossible. Suspended beneath one of the Chinooks was a massive Mi-24 Hind, a Russian-made attack helicopter, essentially a flying tank. For safety, the pilots reduced their speed and separated the helicopters by a mile. Soon, they lost both radio contact and visual sight of each other. The airfield was visible about 15 miles away, but the crew could no longer locate the other Chinook. Instead, they watched in alarm as the sandstorm rose nearly 3,000 feet behind them. Determined to outrun the storm, the commander decided to race to the airfield, set the helicopter down, and land before the swirling sands overtook them. After successfully completing the maneuver, the second Chinook finally emerged from the storm's wall. With no time to spare, its pilot hastily landed without even turning into the wind. Once on the ground, the crews remained inside their helicopters for the next 20 minutes as the sand blasted against the airframes. When they finally stepped outside, they found everything covered in grit. Despite the challenging conditions, they had succeeded in securing their Cold War prize, a fully operational flying tank. The most challenging aspect of the mission proved to be the return to Fort Campbell. The first item to be loaded into the massive C-5 was the Russian helicopter. The aircraft's nose opened as the flying tank is transported inside the plane. The Company E maintenance crew meticulously prepared the MH-47Ds for loading, which involved partially dismantling the top of the Chinook helicopter to ensure it could fit inside another C-5 Galaxy. The C-5 has a cargo capacity of 281,000 pounds, which is equivalent to 127,460 kilograms. It can cover a distance of 2,150 nautical miles on its own. However, with aerial refueling along the way, it can travel non-stop from parts of Western Africa to the eastern coast of the United States, landing at Fort Campbell. Once the aircraft touches down safely, the mission can be considered a success. We also made a deep dive into the sea, air, and land components of the nuclear triad, so subscribe for more videos to not miss a beat.